Alright, having now recorded today's video, I wanted to add at the start of this, I go into a lot of topics very in depth, kind of spread out, so be ready for that, and be ready for those points to be made throughout different parts of the video. You kind of need to see the whole thing to pull it all together and understand, but also if you're really clued up on the subject matter today, or you have a shorter attention span, you may want to go to the timestamp on screen today to skip my intro, but if you do want all the information then great, let's carry on. I hope you enjoy and I love you, and yeah, alright, let's do this. Ladies and gents, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy, back on Battlefield 5 today, and we're going to try and go through these points fairly briefly and succinctly today because I got like 40 bullet points. I don't really want to edit my audio for like 3 hours, so let's see what we can do. Today, I'm going over why Battlefield 5 was made easier for noobs. And I don't mean noob in a negative or critical fashion. We were all noobs at some point, yes, you included, I promise you. You sucked, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that the accepted term for new or less able players is noob, so I'm using it. And this isn't a video to complain about the changes. We've done that before, or at least not entirely complain today. We're going to look at it in a more fleshed out fashion, because it's very easy to be critical, but we also have to be constructive and look at both sides from an unbiased perspective. So what I'm going to do today is explain to you why this kind of stuff happens, how this can be improved moving forwards, and at least partially avoided if DICE make changes for future releases to other aspects of the game. Not that they'll likely listen to me, but at least I can try. And to put across to you that there are understandable reasons why things are sometimes made more accessible for new and less able players, even if they're the wrong changes that the existing player base don't want or agree with, and indeed are changes that I myself can't fully support. So it's a mixture of things they specifically target and actual reasons why these situations exist that they likely don't think of, and some of them they really should. So very quickly, with that out of the way, what are the main changes that most claim were introduced to make the game easier for new and less able players? Well, the very common ones are the reduction to recoil, which was extensive, the TTK changes twice, believe it or not. Yes, we have changed the time to kill to a large degree twice, and then tweaked them back twice, and with another change coming, which is all part of the problem, as we've covered recently. The implementation of player acquisition icons, which I don't really have much of a problem with actually. I think it does help with a lot of issues, but when it was first introduced and then rolled back, it was way too strong, and it became like auto-spotting, so I can understand why some didn't like that. And finally, a big one, the snap lock on aim assist or auto-rotation, which is evident on controllers, but I still can't get a clear answer if it's on mouse and keyboard or not. But that is an issue that I think a lot of people want to be taken away, but DICE seemingly don't want to do it. So why are those changes made for new players when it just seems to upset the existing player base? Well, the truth of the matter is that casual players, new players, players from the wider gaming sphere rather than just Battlefield fans, help a game to grow. This is true for almost all games out there, so they're trying to hit a mainstream audience by lowering the barrier to entry and making playing the game less punishing for new players. That much they're definitely doing on purpose. But what about the reasons the game isn't very accessible that they maybe don't really consider, or apparently don't from what I can tell? Why does this game need to be made easier for some people to want to play it? Well, the game doesn't really tell you much at all. Battlefield is a very complex game, undeniably. There are a lot of factors involved, a lot of mechanics, a lot of things that people aren't used to in other games, and that's part of what makes it very difficult to balance as well. If we compare Battlefield with the simplicity of, say, Call of Duty, which isn't me bashing either game in any way, shape or form, they're just very different, well, that's basically the point. The complexity differences are wildly far apart, and I'll go over what some of those things are. But just very quickly, to make sure you're on my train of thought here, making the game easier in one regard is necessary because it's so complex in other regards. Whether DICE are meaning to do that or not, these are part of the reasons why a lot of people are turned off from Battlefield when they try it. So consider that Battlefield has bullet drop, has travel time, has damage drop off over range, things that aren't particularly common in a lot of FPS games. There are loads of gadgets that do different things, and they're only available on certain classes, and they're used to counter lots of things that again aren't present in other games. You know, there's a class designed to combat vehicles. There are specific vehicle options as well, which is a point which you don't get in a lot of games, with their own skill floors, their own skill ceilings, their own mechanics and things that again aren't explained. There are relatively complex modes. Still, a problem with front lines before it got taken away was that a lot of people just didn't get how it was played. The little intro movies at the start help, but it's generally not enough. Not unless someone is willing to spend time in these modes to really work out what to do, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. For this point specifically, it is nice to have have to work some things out. You don't want everything handed to you on a plate. But still the point remains and is very true. It's very relevant. Add to this that you have squad mechanics, which people generally aren't familiar with. There are the aforementioned different classes with different roles to fulfill in the game, different combat roles even. The different gadgets I mentioned, different grenades for each one, a different purpose for using them. There's all the different weapon types with their own mechanics, their own specializations. There's attrition, where you don't regen health fully and you need a med pack here and there and you need to get resupplies, you need to go to the resupply boxes, and there's forced team play in that and all this kind of stuff. And all the while you're playing against a very experienced long-term player base, which is going to be difficult of course. And none of this is remedied by having effective tutorials, something that I would expect Battlefield to have. A game of this complexity really needs to have things in place to teach new players. You can't really just throw them into a conquest game and be like, go have fun. Yes, some people will, but some people will be confused and some people will get railed by other players. And if the game has too many problems, which Battlefield 5 has had, then you could do with making the experience accessible as well. And I don't think that means making the gunplay easier and all that. I'm not supporting that. But having not put in place things to make the game accessible where all of the game mechanics are concerned, one easier route to go down is to just make the gunplay more accessible so it's less punishing on new players. It levels the playing field, allows them to get kills, and they won't get picked off from all ranges quite as often. To reiterate, I do not support that outlook, but we do need to understand why these things happen. And there are some understandable reasons why. Oh, and no, I don't count the opening playthrough thing when you start the game as being a relevant tutorial. You can learn a little from it, and it's great in terms of being cinematically impressive and get people hyped up for the game, but that's not an effective tutorial. You need a full tutorial playlist of all the different aspects of the game. You need to put the time into making that for people to really grasp what to do. Because if you're watching this now as a long-term player, you were wired right. Your brain was wired correctly for this kind of game. You connected with it. Maybe you had friends to help you through. Maybe some previous games taught you in a better fashion. I don't know. But you need to consider there's a lot of players out there who will jump onto a game like this and just be completely overawed. They will not have any idea what's going on. And again, if you combine being killed every 10 seconds or whatever, it's not a good experience and they're going to quit the game. Because the practice range is poor. It was rushed out and doesn't really do enough for people. Combined arms is just bad and probably generally barely played now at this point. I've been told there's a bootcamp mode available because I said the other day that'd be nice, but it's kind of hidden somewhere. If that's the case, then that's not good enough. And even things like the menus, the server browser isn't really pushed forwards. Like, I imagine most people don't use it and it's not really explained as being a thing. Private games are wildly underutilized and again, not really pushed to the forefront. And when you put all of these things together, the skill gap has been lowered to compensate for them. But what are some of the external things that caused this issue? Well, there was bad PR, there was a lack of sales, there's player churn, there's bugs, there's YouTube content and social media influence all coming together and combining to probably create the outlook for people that don't play Battlefield that Battlefield 5 is bad, that it's not worth trying, that it's in a mess. And so again, to bring it all back, combine those factors, and DICE are generally just looking for any way to bring new people in. Notice how the two large TTK changes came before Christmas 2018 and Christmas 2019. There's definitely something to that. And, as covered previously in some other videos a while back by myself and also mentioned by some knowledgeable people on social media, a lot of the changes put in place didn't directly benefit noobs. It really didn't, but the intention was there to benefit noobs. They didn't do a great job of it. But on the whole, it was beneficial for noobs when you combine the lack of recoil and all that sort of stuff. And where we're at now with the balancing, it's undeniable that it's a lot easier for a lot of people to actually land their shots. Snap lock on aim, lack of recoil, all that kind of stuff. So I do understand why these changes are made. Of course, the game needs to support itself. It needs to try to grow. It needs to try to claw back some of these things that happened. And I hope that you guys keep that stuff in mind as well. It is very relevant. But there are obvious problems with this. I don't think you should risk your hardcore long-term audience to try to pull in new players just because you put the game in a bad spot, which caused a lack of new players coming in and continuing to play long-term. You've got to think of the long-term health of the series, and your core player base is an integral part of that. They should also consider that they said they wouldn't mess with the TTK again in 2018, only to then do that again in 2019. 2019. That's not a good look. It wasn't a good look to have the snap lock on aim assist come in under the radar, not mentioned in any blog posts or anything, only to then be confirmed later on by a community manager when the irrefutable evidence was presented, and to have that community manager say that they weren't informed of the change. If that's true, that's bad, or if the change was just omitted on purpose from the patch notes, that's also really bad. Overall, this has destroyed the weapon balance of the game, which is also obviously very bad, and personally, instead of reducing the barrier to entry on something like gunplay, instead give players more tools to learn from when it comes to the game as a whole. Allow them to learn what the game is, how it works, and to ease themselves in. Obviously, that isn't viable in Battlefield 5 now, but I wish and hope and pray that they'll do it in the next Battlefield. Put the time into accessible tools. Make the game understandable and new player friendly without reducing the complexity of it. And avoid all the bugs and all the poor planning and all the PR and all that sort of stuff as well. And on top of this, as I talked about yesterday, add an effective team balancer so people aren't getting crushed and being turned away from the game. Plus, especially on PC, anti-cheat. Imagine being an Asian player right now, picking up the game for the first time, excited to go on, you jump into one of those Asian servers and it's full of cheaters and hackers. How long are you going to play for? Not very long. And so my message is, vilifying DICE for these changes isn't necessarily the way to go in terms of the position they've been forced into, but they have also created this position for themselves, and I think they're going about it the wrong way. I hope they take on my advice, and I'm not some oracle, I don't get everything right all the time, but I really think some of this is very valid advice, and combine that with the advice you see from some other content creators and just people within the community talking on social media, on Reddit, on Twitter, wherever. There's a lot of great ideas out there. Management, sort out your issues, support your devs properly, and let's avoid this problem happening again. And I really hope now I've gone through all of that in as succinct a way as I can manage, you understand why we're in this scenario, why this stuff happens, why we shouldn't always throw all the blame at DICE, but we definitely need to hold them accountable for the mistakes they've made. And I hope you enjoyed this video or found it informative. If you did either of those, please hit the like button for me, I really appreciate it. Subscribe if you're new here, I got loads of content coming out at the minute, loads I said, and for some reason. And all my links to my social media are in the description below, including Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, here is the Board of Awesome for the epic people who support me on there already. They're absolute heroes and love them all deeply and of course often. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I am GetGoodGuy and I'll see you next time. Laters. Not 15 months after release. Take this problem away by employing something that existed